Shalom. This coming Shabbat, we will read, Im Yirtzeh Hashem, Parashat Mishpatim. Now, this parasha is going to discuss laws that pertain to the relationship between people, among people, one with his fellow man. Anything that has to do with that, and that's practically half the commandments of the Torah. We have 613 commandments, and at least half of them relate to monetary matters. People have to be very careful how to deal with money when it comes to their fellow men, and everything. Now, and this parasha, it comes immediately after the last week's parasha, in which we read the glorious 10 commandments that were given at the mountain of Sinai. Of course, the 10 commandments are not just 10 commandments. We have there practically all the Torah is concealed in the 10 commandments. But the 10 commandments are the heads of all the other 613 precepts of the Torah. So now we find that this parasha of this coming Shabbat is following the very important parasha of Yitro, in which we read the 10 commandments and all the glorious situation of the Jewish people at the time when they stood at the mountain of Sinai. And here we begin a new kind of laws, monetary matters, in Parashat Mishpatim. Now, Rashi brings in his first commentary on this parasha, he relates to the fact that it says that the first verse of this portion of the Torah begins with Ve'ele HaMishpatim, and Vav is and these are the laws that have to do with monetary matters. Ele HaMishpatim asher tasim lifnehem. And the first law has to do with when you purchase a Hebrew slave. Now, of course, this does not pertain to today. We don't have any more slavery. And even at the time of the Bible, when there was such a thing, but you had to understand that by the Jewish people, it's not like we have seen among the nations when they captured someone to become a slave, when all his life he was cruelly treated and so forth. Here the Torah begins by telling us how to deal with a Hebrew slave. I mean, in which circumstances do we find that we can have a Hebrew slave? Only when a Jew, for example, owes money and he doesn't have money with which to pay what he owes. In that case, in biblical times, there was such a thing that he would come to the person to whom he owes the money, and through, of course, the influence of Bet Din, then he becomes a worker, a regular worker of this man. We call him a slave because a Jew should be a free man, but since this man, either because he stole money and he could not return it, or because he owes money and he cannot pay, so he brings, and it's like he becomes hired as a worker. So there are laws that pertain to that. Our sages say in the Talmud that you have to be very careful how to deal with a Hebrew slave, even to such a point, almost exaggerated point, that let's say you have only one pillow for yourself, and now you have a Hebrew slave. You have only one pillow, you give him your pillow and you stay without pillow and let your slave enjoy the pillow. Of course, it's only a mashal, but it has to do with many other things. You have to do, that's what the Torah is teaching us here. Of course, what the portion of the Torah is telling us is not enough for us to know all the laws. For that, you have to study the Talmud, you have to study Jewish law, and to understand that here the Torah is trying to convey a message of being kind, how to be kind to your fellow man, especially the fellow man who is in need. and he has to bring himself into a situation that usually is not something that everyone wants to have. But he has no choice, so therefore you have to give him. There are laws that pertain to him and his family, and you have to take care of them. And he, of course, he has to work with loyalty to his master, so-called master. But it has nothing to do with slavery the way we know it, how it happened throughout the generations. Today, the law of slavery is not anymore the same thing. So you might think that this is the first law that we read in the portion of the Torah of this coming Shabbat. And one can bring himself to ask the question, how come the Torah, which is eternal, is bringing the first law regarding the monetary matters, the law of the Hebrew slave? But there's no more slavery. So how come? You mean that the Torah is talking about something that is not anymore relevant? I mean, since we have no more slavery, so perhaps you tell me here is one law of the Torah that does not exist anymore. That's not true. Because if you learn with some kind of profundity into the laws of Hebrew slave, you will find that there are other laws that have to do with the relationship with people. How to deal with people that are in need. And you have to be very careful also from bringing yourself into this kind of situation. Such as, for example, to be very careful not to steal money. Not to take loans that you know you cannot return, for example, and so forth. Everything that has to do with that. Otherwise, so what is the connection with the Torah of Hebrew slave? Otherwise, if you have no money, then you have to regard yourself. That if there was still the law of slavery, you would consider yourself a slave that has to work during a certain time, in which the Torah says 6 years, no more than 6 years for a Hebrew slave, right? And that's also part of the whole plan here. But the main idea is to know that one has to deal with his fellow man, no matter how low his fellow man has brought himself into a situation that is extremely alarming, that is not something that is liked. It's not a situation that especially one Jew wants to bring himself into it. But sometimes situations happen, right? So here we are being taught by the Torah how to work with your fellow man with a good heart, give him the proper respect that he deserves, and so forth. And that's why the Torah here, in this parasha, which is talking about hundreds of laws that have to do with monetary matters, is beginning with the law of Hebrew slaves. Now the law, there is no more slavery, so why should we have it? We have it because through this teaching of the Hebrew slave, we understand how we should deal with our fellow men. Always with kindness, always with a good heart, always with respect and honoring, like it says in the Torah, you have to love your fellow man like yourself. And what about if your fellow man is in need and he has no choice but to become your worker? Then you have to learn also the laws, how to deal with your fellow man who comes to work by you apparently as a slave. He's not really a slave, but because his situation became very aggravated by the fact that he cannot pay back what he owes, therefore you give the maximum of understanding to this fellow man. That's what we can learn from this parasha. And the first law that begins, that is brought in this parasha, is the law of Hebrew slaves. So far from us to think that here is one law that does not exist anymore. It has to do with its profundity, with the senses of goodness. You learn how to be a mensch. You learn how to be a good person through the law of Hebrew slave. Of course, there could be situations in which there is a Hebrew slave even today. But it's so minimal. This situation does not occur anymore, even in the wide world. So therefore you might think that this law does not exist anymore. It does exist in different ways. But we can learn many ways that are different from that law which is brought in today's parasha, in this week's parasha. Now Rashi brings in the very beginning, how come the Torah, this parasha, begins with ve'ele. In Hebrew, vav is and. Do you start a sentence with and, a and d? You don't start a sentence with that. It should have started by the words ele ha-mishpatim. These are the laws that have to do with monetary matters, right? How come it said ve'ele, and these laws? Now remember, we did mention the fact that this parasha, we read this parasha immediately after last week's parasha, in which we read about the 10 Commandments at the mountain of Sinai, right? Now everyone knows that the laws that we learned at the mountain of Sinai are eternal, very important, no one can change them, and so forth. And you might think that now the laws that come after, such as monetary matters, they seem to be laws that have to do with people, has nothing to do with God, and therefore they are less important. Here comes Rashi and tells us, of course these are the words of our sages quoted by Rashi, Ma ele misinai, af ma harishoni misinai, af ele misinai. You have to understand that what we have learned at the mountain of Sinai from God himself and the teachings of Moshe, of Moses, as we know that those laws that we heard at the mountain of Sinai are very important, the same way we should refer to the laws that come after. The laws of Parashat Mishpatim were also given at the mountain of Sinai, which means they require the same respect and given the same importance as we give to the laws at the mountain of Sinai, the same way we should give to the laws that have to do with money among people. Between people. And that's a very important teaching, by the way, that we have to learn before we start even learning this parasha. Now this parasha has many commandments that have to do with how to give a loan, that the importance of giving a loan, for example, as it says in the Torah, in this parasha, Im kesef talve et ami et he'ani imach. You have to understand that it's a great mitzvah to give loans to someone who is in need. Maimonides writes in his book that, in fact, even Jewish law, we know that the mitzvah of giving a loan is even more important than the mitzvah of charity. Giving a loan is also charity by itself, but charity is when you give money to someone for free. Now, that sometimes has to do with shame. It's shameful to receive money that you did not earn. Therefore, our sages say that to give a loan to somebody who needs it is even much more important than giving charity, because charity involves some kind of embarrassment, whereas giving a loan to someone, it does not mean that he has to be embarrassed, since he knows he will have to pay back. So therefore, it's only momentary, temporary, and therefore there is no embarrassment. To save a person from embarrassment when he is in need of your help is a tremendous mitzvah. This is one of the things that we learn in this parasha. Now, in this parasha, what is mentioned also is the fact that when the Jewish people stood at the mountain of Sinai, it's like God asked them, would you like to receive my Torah? It's not exactly as I am saying it. We don't see it in the verses, but through the teachings of our sages, such as we find in Masechet Avodah Zarah, on the second page, we find in the Midrash, we find in other places in the Talmud, that God came and he asked the Jewish people, would you like to receive my Torah? And by the way, the same thing happened with, God did not ignore the nations. He went, apparently according to the legend, this is a mashal that we have to understand it with the proper depth. You understand? So he went, it's like if he went to the other nations and he asked them, would you like to receive my Torah? And the nations were interested in the Torah, but they were interested to know, first tell us what is written there. Maktiv ba, it says. They said. So God says, you ask me what is written there, I will tell you. So for example, the nation of Moab, right? And in biblical times, the nation of Moab was one of the biggest nations, right? And they represent all kinds of nations. So God went to the nation of Moab. Would you like to receive my Torah? They said, what is written there? Tell us. Which is very logical, by the way, right? I mean, you want someone to listen to what you have to say? Okay, let me hear first. And then I'll tell you whether I accept it or not. Logical. And this is exactly what the nations did. So they asked something logical, tell us. And God says, okay. To the nation of Moab, he said, here is what is written in my Torah. Lo tin'af. Do not commit adultery. Immediately they said, well, then we cannot accept this Torah. Since our whole inception came from adultery. You know that Lot, how did the nation of Moab came to be? How did it come to be to the world? From the relationship between the father and his two daughters, Lot, the cousin of Abraham, our father Abraham, and his two daughters. You know the story when they thought that the world came to an end with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So his daughters, they were very smart, very wise, and they thought that they are the only one left in the world. So they have only one man with them, and that's their father. So what did they do? So the Torah tells us the story that probably many people know, Jews and non-Jews, that they gave their father something to drink, and they came and they cohabited with him the first day, and then the second followed, and that's how we have two nations. Two nations were born from this relationship. The first one was Moab, which means me'av. In Hebrew it means from the father. So this is a case of adultery, of course. We know that it's incest. But the understanding of the daughters of Lot was in a much more elevated than what we think. But the point is that that's what happened. The nation of Moab was born from that kind of incestuous relationship. And the nation of Ammon came from the second daughter who cohabited with her father. And that's how we have two nations, Ammon and Moab, the very known enemies of the people of Israel. So God came to them, would you like to receive my Torah? They said, tell us what is written there. So God says, oh, you want me to tell you what is written there? Okay. Here is one commandment that it says there. Lo tin'af, do not commit adultery. Where they said it's impossible then, since our creation came from adultery, so how can we accept this Torah? So God went to the nation of Ishmael, and he said to them, would you like to receive my Torah? And they said they made the same mistake. They asked, first tell us what is written there. And God says, what is written there? Lo tignov, do not steal. So immediately the nation of Ishmael said, that means we cannot accept your Torah. Why? Because our main philosophy, im yado bakol v'yad kol bo. Ishmael has this kind of system. His hand is upon everything else. I mean, what belongs to you is mine. That's what Ishmael says. And what is mine, and what is yours is mine also. So therefore, how can you ask me not to steal? Therefore, I cannot accept your Torah. So the Midrash goes on saying that God went to the nation of Esav, that's the nation of Edom, which in fact is most of the modern world today. And he said to them, would you like to receive my Torah? And they did the same mistake, asking what maktiv ba, what is written there. And God said, what is written there is not to kill, lo tirtzach, do not murder. So they said, the nation of Esav said, sorry, we cannot accept your Torah, because our father Esav, The main blessing that his father gave him, his father Isaac, Yitzchak, gave him was, Al harbecha tihyeh, you shall live by the sword. So how can you ask me not to kill, since our philosophy is to kill? Of course, we live on that. So the Midrash goes on and says, and now God went to the people of Israel. Would you like to receive my Torah? They did not make that mistake asking what's written in there. They immediately said, Na'aseh venishma. We shall do, and later we will understand. Which means, we accept your Torah. The Talmud says in Masechet Shabbat, at that minute when the Jewish people said, we accept the Torah even before we learn it. At that time, all the angels of God came and they put a crown over the heads of every Jew. Now, what does it mean? It means something profound and deep. That's not the point. The point is that the Jewish people were the only nation that accepted the Torah before they even learn it. Now, there is something that is difficult to understand, by the way. The Talmud in Masechet Shabbat, on page 88, Pechet. And there it says that God sort of rebuking the Jewish people, saying, Kafa alehem hahar kegigit. That God forced upon the Jewish people with the mountain upon them, and he said to them, either you accept my Torah, or there shall be your burial. You will die. Why do you have to tell me that we were forced to accept the Torah? We were not forced. God asked the Jewish people, and the Jewish people said yes, before they know anything about the Torah. So how come it says that God has forced the Jewish people by putting the mountains over their heads? Kafa alehem har kegigit ve'amar lahem im tekablu et Torah mutav. He said to them, if you accept my Torah, then it's good. If not, sham tehe kevuratchem. There will be your burial. Which, by the way, tells us a hint that the Jewish people cannot survive except by accepting the Torah. The fact that we accepted the Torah of God, we have assured with tremendous certainty our eternality, the right to our existence. Indeed. I mean, the Ten Commandments were given 3,300 years ago, somehow. And since then, today, that's 3,000 years ago and more. And we are still here. The same Jewish people, the same traditions, the same laws, the same civilization, the same language, everything. And the world knows that very well. We have discussed this last week. That the world knows very well that this is the same people, the original people of Israel. Of course, when you talk about religions, then there are some religions such as Christianity and Islam. They say, no, that's not the original Jewish people. The original Jewish people perished. God did not like them, so he finished with them. But they know the truth. They know the truth. I mean, we have the same traditions. We still celebrate Pesach the way exactly how it started 3,500 years ago, after the redemption of the Jewish people from Egypt. And every year at the time of Passover, we celebrate Passover by reading our story, the story of our traditions and our forefathers, the Haggadah of Pesach, right? Isn't this a good proof that we are the original people? Now, let's not talk about the Torah itself. I mean, we study the same Torah. I mean, when you come on Shabbat or Monday and Thursday and you come to the synagogue with the Jewish people, we open the scroll of the Torah. What do we read there? We read the Torah exactly as it was given to us at the mountain of Sinai and in the wilderness of Sinai, that Moses taught the Jewish people. The same Torah, not even one letter is missing or added. In fact, there is a law, a Jewish law, that says that if one letter is missing in the scroll of Torah, the whole scroll should be fixed. Otherwise, you cannot. It's not kosher for reading. One letter is missing there, or not only if one letter is missing, and even if one letter is broken. So it's not missing, it's there, only it's broken. Its face has changed. Immediately you cannot read on that scroll of Torah until you fix it, of course. That's why we have what we call the scribes, the sofrim, right? It could take a minute to fix a Torah as much as a year. But you cannot read in a scroll of Torah unless if it is 100% kosher, right? What does it say? It says that this is the same Torah that we have accepted at the mountain of Sinai. It never was allowed to change in any way. That's the only nation in the world that, because they kept their Torah. Of course, we have many Jews among us who are not obedient to Hashem and His Torah. We know that. But there is still, Baruch Hashem, maybe a minority, sometimes a majority, depending on the generations. But the Jewish people is still going on with the same Torah. Let's go to a Jew who is not an observant Jew and tell him, go ahead and become a Muslim. He will laugh at you. I mean, Jewish history is replete with cases in which Jews gave their life rather than to convert to any other religion. And then that doesn't mean it did not happen. It did happen, but we know that many thousands have died because they were Jewish. I mean, let alone what happened in the Holocaust, that 6 million Jews perished just because they are Jews, not because we have committed anything against the world. Quite the contrary. The Jewish people has contributed so much to any country in which they lived. They brought only a blessing. I can tell you my own experience with the King of Morocco, Hassan, the second Hassan, God bless his memory, who told me, please ask the Jewish people to return to Morocco, because when they left us, the barakah, the blessing, has abandoned us. They know the truth. They know what it means to be a Jew. It's not easy to be a Jew. To be a Jew means to be different. That's why we have suffered throughout the centuries. But you see, we are here. We are still here. It's something that is defying any kind of logic. I mean, even the world, the biggest philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre from France, he said this is unbelievable, that Jewish people is still here. And yet, we have to admit, what did he say, Jean-Paul Sartre? We have to admit that we don't like the Jew. Why? Because he's different than us. What can we do? We have accepted the Torah of God, and we keep it, and it has protected our survival. Maybe it did not prevent us from suffering, but it prevented us from extinction. And why is that? Because we said, Na'aseh v'nishma. So now let's return to the question by which I started a while before. Why does it say in the Talmud, that means the oral law, why does it say that God forced upon us the Torah? We did say, the Torah, the written Torah says very clearly that we have declared an illogical statement saying, Na'aseh v'nishma, we accept, and then later we shall hear, we shall understand. Which is practically illogical, and yet we did it. And that's the reason why we are still here today. So why does he say that he forced upon us the Torah? Kaffa aleihem har kegigit. The Tosfot, the commentary on the Talmud, on the same page, says that what he forced upon us is the oral law, not the written Torah. We have accepted quickly, without any conditions, the written Torah. But apparently it was harder to accept the oral Torah, the Talmud, and its teachings. So he had to force upon us and to say, you accept it, then good. If not, there should be your burial. What does it mean? Well, it means that without the oral law, we cannot understand the written Torah. Without the oral law, that's the Talmud, the teachings of the Talmud, which in fact is the book from which the wisdom of the Jewish people is quite clear and known in the world. It comes from the Talmud. But the Talmud is not something different than the Torah. It is the commentary of the Torah. Without the Talmud, we cannot understand the real meaning of the verses of the written Torah. There are many things in the Torah that cannot be understood unless if you study the Talmud. So that's not easy to accept the Talmud on the top of the 613 precepts of the Torah was difficult. So perhaps, at least partially, the Jewish people maybe found it difficult. Therefore God says, I have to, now that you have accepted the written Torah, I have no choice but to force you to accept also the oral Torah. So he said, if you accept the oral Torah also, you shall live. Good. But if not, there shall be your burial. What does it mean? It means that the Jew without the oral law will disappear. That's the meaning of your burial, your death. It means that the Jew will be extinct without the Talmud. Now you tell me maybe we are exaggerating? Well, the answer is quite evident. We are here today to prove it. Without the Talmud, without the study of the Talmud, generation after generations, Jews sat down and delved into the book of the Talmud and all its, the well of wisdom of the Jewish people. That's the reason why we have survived. But if we have accepted only the written Torah, without the oral Torah, where would we be today? Would there be any Jewish people? Anyone who understands a little bit about the wisdom of Torah knows that you cannot survive without the Talmud. I mean, 2,000 years ago, there were those Jews who made that mistake. The Sadducees, for example, from whom apparently Christianity began from the Sadducees. So what does it mean? Different religion. Of course, I'm not saying that Christianity is not good. It's also a religion that was created by God. God allowed it to be in the world because the world needs very much Christianity. The world needs Islam, yes, because those two great religions have done something formidable. They have brought idol worshipping to an end and all kinds of other criminal acts that used to be very common in the world. But the religion of the Jewish people is something else. We are the nation of God. That's something else. So like we read in last week's Parashat, when God says, Ve'ata, im tishme'u li, ve'tishmeru et beriti, v'hiyitem li segula mikol amim. God says to the Jewish people, if you obey my Torah, and you follow my laws that I have written in the Torah, and you obey my will, then v'hiyitem li segula mikol ha'amim, you will become my special nation. Segula means otzar nechmad, which means you will be a treasure by me. Now, what kind of treasure, I don't know. It's not easy, as I said, it's not easy to be a Jew. We have paid dearly for being Jewish. In every generation, from the time of the Romans, what haven't they done in order to bring us into an end? I mean, Greece, from the time of Hanukkah to 2,300 years ago, right? And now let's go through the Inquisition, of Spanish Inquisition, that they forced upon us to convert to other religions, to Christianity and so forth. Jews perished by the fire. They were thrown into furnaces because they refused to accept other religions. But the point is, and then the Holocaust itself. We don't have any clear answer about the Holocaust. Anyone who says some of the Kabbalists say different reasons why the Holocaust happened. It's possible that it's true or not, but the regular Jew cannot understand what happened to us during the Holocaust. 6 million Jews perished in such a cruel thing that's unbelievable, which, by the way, testifies to the authenticity of the good senses of the world. I mean, I cannot be more clear than that. It shows what is the meaning of being the other nations. We have a grudge against the nations for what they have done to us, but we have not raised our hands against them. This is a business of God. And why is that? We have only one proof. We cannot explain the Holocaust. We cannot explain the suffering of our forefathers in the time of the Inquisition and other times and in all the generations. Like we read the night of Passover, of Pesach, we see בכל דור ודור קמים עלינו לכלותנו והקדוש ברוך הוא מצילנו מידם. In every generations, the nations rise upon us to decimate us, to finish with us. We apparently bother them. We apparently, as though we tell them, as long as we are alive, it means that we are not the true religion. Maybe that's what it means. Otherwise, you tell me, why were we so hated? Why we are still hated until today? Why is it that the nations hate us? All we did in the world was to bring contributions after contributions. Perhaps the biggest contributions that the world has ever received came only from the Jewish people. So why were we hated? Well, there is one explanation. It's psychological, it's true. Because we are still here today to defy the biggest religion. We are a small religion, right? And yet we are the father of all religions, right? So we are here to say that as long as we are here, as long as we are in our existence, maybe there is a doubt about the other religions, and the other religions feel it. Maybe we are not correct. That's the reason why they want us not to be alive. We bother them, but they should not really. We should not. I mean, we didn't bother anybody. The Jewish people has done only good. When did you ever see the Jewish people going and killing people by the masses? Of course, you will tell me in biblical time, but that's already something else. That's a divine commandment that had to be fulfilled in this way or another. But has nothing to do with the last 3,000 years in which the Jewish people never raised its hand against anybody, except to defend itself, of course, from time to time. Like today, for example, when we have Tzva Hagana Israel, with the help of God, of course, we raise our heads again, after we have lowered it for so many generations. So, what I mean to say is that the reason why we are here today, despite all the sufferings that we have endured, is because of that day in which the Jewish people declared, Na'aseh v'nishma. We accept the Torah. Later we will study it. We will learn it later. Unlike the other nations who said, first, Ma ketiv ba, let's see first what is written there. So God says, if you are asking me to show you before, which is apparently logical, but it means also that you are not fit for the Torah. And indeed the Talmud says, Chochma b'goyim ta'amin. Yes, if you seek wisdom among the nations, you will find it, yes. Torah b'goyim al ta'amin. But if you say that the Torah exists among the different nations, do not believe it. Because the Torah does not fit them. They did not receive it. They did not receive it, they cannot, even if they learn it sometimes, you hear here and there. Of course, except if those people who converted to Judaism, they became also good learners of Torah. But those who remain non-Jews, to pretend to say that they have a Torah, does not fit them. You cannot believe it. But wisdom, there is plenty of wisdom. We had Socrates, we had Aristotle, we had many other great philosophers in all the generations, no question about it. Even our great Rambam, the Maimonides, declares his respect and admiration towards the great sages of Greece and others. We respect all wisdom, but the Torah belongs only to the Jewish people because they have accepted it, and because of it they are still alive today. We are here testifying to the fact that God is present, that the existence of God is definite and sure. Why? Because we are still here today to prove it. Shabbat Shalom.